morning, everybody. Welcome to your orientation session on the new version of the Australian Blueprint for Career Development. My name's David Carney. I'm the Executive Director of the Career Industry Council. Before we get underway this morning, I would just like to acknowledge that I am joining you this morning from the lands of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live and work, and also to the traditional custodians of the lands and waters which we may visit on as part of our work. I'd like to acknowledge their elders, past and present, and extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples who may be joining us this morning. As was advertised, this is an orientation session to the Blueprint, so the content of this morning's session is designed for people that are new to the Blueprint or don't have an understanding of the Blueprint. If you're familiar with the Blueprint or you've used the Blueprint before, then this will just probably be a refresher session for you. This morning, we're very lucky that our orientation session is going to be hosted, or we're going to be presented to us by Dr. Mary McMahon. Mary's the Honorary Associate Professor at the University of Queensland in the School of Education, and Mary is the developer and co-author of the Systems Theory Framework of Career Development. Mary was also a co-author of a publication called Managing Life, Learning and Work in the 21st Century, and this particular publication informed the design of the original Blueprint for Career Development. And this particular paper sought to raise the awareness of the important issues that the Blueprint seeks to address. So I'd now like to hand over to Mary and ask her to take us through the next 30 minutes of orientation of the new version of the Blueprint. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, David, and thanks for the opportunity to present this orientation session today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm presenting today from the lands of the Yugara and Turrbal people, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. Well, as David said, this is an orientation session to the Blueprint, and so we'll be going through the entire Blueprint in a fairly short space of time. The slide on your screen now actually presents a summary, if you like, of the entire Blueprint. This particular document, which is a poster that accompanies the Blueprint, and you can find it on the Blueprint website that we'll give you later, actually contains all of the elements of the Blueprint. So this is a fabulous little go-to document, a one-page document where you can find everything about the Blueprint on one page. So this is particularly useful if you want to just have a quick reference, or if you want to sort of show other people that you're working with quickly rather than having to look for pages in the Blueprint. So what we're going to do in this orientation is actually unpack those elements in a little bit more detail. So we'll move on and think about, well, what is the Blueprint? Well, actually, as you could see on that previous slide, it's a framework, and that framework is grounded in career theory. And the original edition of the Australian Blueprint was also grounded in career theory. And one of the important things about the Australian Blueprint was that we were the first country in the world who had a blueprint, who had developed a blueprint, who actually developed as well a foundational document that grounded the Blueprint in career theory. So the publication Managing Life, Learning and Work that David mentioned before, that I co-authored with Wendy Patton and Peter Tatham, was that document. So that's really important, that in the Blueprint we have that theory practice link. And so the Blueprint then can be used to develop, implement and evaluate intentional career development learning for people of all ages and stages, beginning in early childhood. And we sometimes forget that career development learning begins in early childhood. And the reason we have the intentional in that definition or explanation of the Blueprint is that the learning that we facilitate is intentional. As we progress through life, we see people in jobs, we learn the skills that are needed in jobs, etc. But a lot of that learning is unintentional, it's incidental. And what we do in the career development programs that we facilitate, or in our career counselling or in our career education, is actually intentional career development learning. How does it do that? Well, it actually identifies the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that individuals need to make sound choices and effectively manage their career. So these are the career management competencies that people need to be able to effectively engage in and manage their careers and their career transitions across the lifespan. So let's take a closer look at what the elements of that framework are and what the theoretical foundation is of that blueprint document. Well, basically, it's founded in two bodies of theory: career theory, obviously, but also learning theory, because we have to be able to apply the blueprint. So the career theory, as you can see, that feeds into the blueprint is very broad-based, because it has to be. Because those of you who've studied career development will know that there are many, many different theories. Career development is a very complex phenomena, and it needs many theories to explain all of the elements of that phenomena. So we draw on that theory body in the blueprint. So basically the person-environment fit theories, and Holland is probably the most well-known example of a person-environment fit theory, talk about the sort of personal attributes that we take into account when we think about our career decisions and career decision makings. So things like our personality, our interests, our values, our attributes, our skills are all personal attributes that will have some bearing on the sorts of career choices that we make. Another body of theory is developmental career theory, and SUPER is probably the name you're most likely to know if you've studied career development. And this body of theory says, well, actually, career development is a lifespan phenomena. And at different ages across our career, we'll have different ideas about our career, we'll be experiencing different tasks, we'll have different goals in mind. So a very young child, for example, will just be beginning to realise that their parents work, that people in the supermarket are working, and they will begin to identify themselves in adult roles. That's one phase. But as an adolescent, an adolescent might be thinking about, well, what subjects will I choose? And an adult might be thinking about, well, how can I move beyond this job to get some skills to move somewhere else? How can I reduce my workload so that I have more time to care for my elderly parents? So developmental career theory is important. Career decision-making theories, and you may be familiar with the work of Krumboltz and his social learning theory of career decision-making, or Lent and his colleagues who have social cognitive career theory. Those theories focus specifically on how we make career decisions and what feeds into those decisions. Another body of theory, the contextual theories, actually say, well, hang on, careers aren't developed and decisions aren't made in isolation. We need to take into account the entire context. We need to think about gender, we need to think about family, we need to think about the community in which our decision is being made. We need to think about the socioeconomics that might be affecting our decision. We need to think about the location of our decision and the opportunities or resources that might be available to us in that particular location. So contextualizing our decisions is really, really important. And then career construction theory, the work of Mark Savickas, emphasizes the role of individuals and their personal agency in actually designing or constructing their careers. Now, learning theory, and we know that there are many different learning theories, but in career development, experiential learning theory is the one that is most appropriate for facilitating career development learning. It was first proposed by Kolb in 1984, and it's the one that is advocated as being best for teaching career development to other people. So this is the body of theory that informs the blueprint. So let's take a look at what we draw from that body of theory. And basically, the key theoretical understandings are that work, learning, and life are interconnected elements of a career. So we know that if we have a job, our salary will determine the sort of lifestyle that we can live, the sort of hours that we have to spend, the impact on other aspects of our life. We know that career development is a lifelong process that begins in early childhood, that there are different phases that we progress through across our lifespan in terms of our career. And the blueprint specifically uses the word phases because the developmental career theories use stages and they're age-related, but the blueprint moves away from necessarily being age-related to having these phases that people progress through. People need competencies to manage their careers. So these are the sorts of, I guess, skills and knowledge that help us to make decisions, to make effective transitions. And the important thing that we know from that body of theory is that the career development competencies can be learned. And so we know, therefore, that career development practitioners can actually assist people to develop the competencies that they need to manage their careers. So let's see how that all plays out in terms of the blueprint. Well, the elements that you saw, and probably you couldn't read on the first slide when we presented that overview of the framework, but the elements of the blueprint include 12 career management competencies that are grouped into 3 learning areas. Learning area A is personal management. That relates to knowing ourselves, being able to identify our learning needs, being able to understand the sort of personality we have, the sort of interests we have, and how that might feed into career decision making. Learning and work exploration is basically knowing about the world of work, knowing how to access career information, and knowing how to use that information effectively. And career building are the sorts of skills we need to effectively transition between phases of our career, to actually apply for and maintain work. So those are the 3 broad learning areas. And the 5 developmental phases briefly are awareness, exploring, starting out, groundwork, and advancing. And I'll go through all of that in more detail for you in a couple of slides' time. The other elements of the blueprint are performance indicators. Now, we know that if we're trying to develop skills and knowledge, we have to know when our learners have achieved those skills and knowledge. And the performance indicators are exactly how we do that. So when we're planning a learning activity, we need to identify what the performance indicators are up front. Career development learning, as we said, is informed by experiential learning, and there's a section on experiential learning in the blueprint, and the learning must be contextualized. So those are the 5 elements of the blueprint, and I'll go through each of them in more detail. In terms of the learning areas, we've got these 3 learning areas and 4 competencies in each. Basically about building and maintaining a positive self-concept, being able to interact effectively and positively with others, and being able to change and grow, recognizing when we need to move on, recognizing what we've learned, what we can take with us to the next phase of our career, and managing our well-being, mental and physical health. That particular competency is a new one since the first iteration of the blueprint, because a lot of work has been done since the first iteration of the blueprint to actually make some really clear links between mental health and well-being and career development. So we know that being in employment, for example, predisposes people to better mental health than being unemployed or struggling to find work. So that's an important competency that has been introduced into this revised edition of the blueprint. In terms of learning and work exploration, being able to participate in lifelong learning that is taking us towards the achievement of our career goals, being able to find and effectively use career information and really be a discerning user of career information. Understanding the relationship between work, society, and the economy. And this is an increasingly important competency because for much of the history of career development, we've actually focused on making the decision that's good for us. What will suit our values, our personality, our interests, what will satisfy us. But now, because of the Sustainable Development Agenda, that's a worldwide agenda, and because of the whole focus on green careers and sustainability, people in our field are beginning to say we need to think about our careers in terms of not just us, but in terms of those around us, the environment, the economy. So what is the impact of this decision going to be on not just me, but the people around me and the environment? So thinking more broadly about decisions and how they connect up with other facets of life, and understanding the changing role of life and work roles. And we know that as we progress through life, we have different life roles, for example, parenting, and or caring for an older parent, and we have to manage those work roles. Career building about all the competencies that we need to actually engage in building and maintaining our career across the lifespan, about securing and maintaining work, about how we make career decisions that are good for us and increasingly good for the society around us, good for the people around us, and good for the environment. Maintaining balanced life-work roles. So how do we actually balance our employment with our role as a parent, our role as a partner, our role in a sporting team, and perhaps our role in another club or committee? How do we manage that? And understanding and engaging in career building, knowing when we're in need of a change, knowing when we may want to move on, and knowing how to go about that. So the developmental phases are basically saying that at different times in our career, not necessarily age-related, we will become aware of a need for a change or something that's coming up in the future. We'll begin to explore that. We will start out moving in that direction. We will apply some groundwork to get that decision off the ground, and we will advance in terms of that. So basically, we could think of these phases in terms of an age-related approach. So we could think of small children becoming aware of the fact that their parents work, people in shops work, and they could begin to imagine themselves in the world of work. And they will often do that through play. And they often won't distinguish between things like being a plumber and being a dinosaur. They will, but they're imagining what it will be like in the adult world. And then as they get older, children will begin to think, well, hey, I'm good at maths, maybe I could be an accountant, or I'm good at English, maybe I could be a journalist. And they start out in secondary school to actually build build on those concepts that they've developed, to extend them and start to think about the subjects that they might need to take them towards those careers, etc. So they're really beginning to develop some career management skills and apply them. And groundwork is really when they're really putting those career management skills into action. They're actually making the decisions about subjects, about applying for a promotion, about scaling down from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. They're really putting their career management skills into action. And advancing is when really they're applying these skills and readily able to do so throughout their life. If we think, though, about those phases in an adult, for an example, As an adult, we know that we have many career changes in a lifetime. As an adult, we may become aware of an area in the corporation in which we work that we are interested in. And so then we might think, well, how could I find out a little bit more about that area? And so we'll explore ways of perhaps developing our knowledge and skills in that area. And we might then complete a course and that could be a course offered through the corporation, or it could be a course at a university or TAFE to build our knowledge, to actually start out on that direction that we want to move in. And then we find ways of applying those skills and knowledge. And then we might actually get a job where we can use those skills and knowledge. So these phases aren't necessarily age-related, although they could be. So how do those competencies and phases hang together? Well, in actual fact, this is what builds the framework that you saw on the first slide. We've got the career management competencies down the left, and you can see the first one there, build and maintain a positive self-concept. Across the top, you can see the phases of career development. And then you can see how for each phase, the competency is tailored to be a little bit more conceptually challenging as the phases progress. The skills from awareness to advancing would be a little more complex. So even though it's one competency, we can develop it in different ways at different phases of a person's career. So basically, they're going to be conceptually more challenging in the phases, in the later phases, and their skills are going to be a little more challenging in the later phases. So they're the management competencies and the phases. So let's think about now, if we're going to have a career development program in an organisation, if we're going to run career education in school, if we're going to be conducting a career development learning program in a university, for example, or even if we're working one-on-one with a client, if we're developing that program, we need to know where we're headed. So a goal of that is to know what the career management competencies are that we want the learners to have achieved. And this is good for us because we know where we're headed and we can plan clearly how to get there, but it's good for learners because they know what they'll be able to do at the end of this period of learning. So basically, the performance indicators illustrate the ways that individuals can demonstrate, and that's important, they have to be able to show that they have achieved the competency. And for that reason, the performance indicators begin with verbs like create or identify or demonstrate or assess or determine. So these are verbs because we can actually see that the competency has been achieved. The important thing with these performance indicators is that they need to be appropriate to the specific clients or client groups or contexts in which they are learning. We know that even if we have one cohort of learners, the needs will be different across that cohort. So we need to tailor our performance indicators accordingly. We know, for example, that career development learning in a rural or remote location is going to have different resources available to it, different stakeholders available than if we're working in an urban context. So the important thing with the performance indicators is that they really need to be identified right up front when the learning activity is being planned. So we need to ask ourselves at the beginning when we're planning, how will I know learners have achieved this competency? How will they demonstrate it? And if we do that, then we can plan our learning activity with a view to getting there. So if that's what the blueprint is, then who might be using the blueprint and actually applying those competencies, phases, and performance indicators? Well, those elements of the blueprint actually help us develop learning opportunities. It helps us evaluate and market our career development programs and activities. It helps us design products and services. It could help us redesign or enhance our existing programs. So if we're running, for example, a career education program in a school, a career development program in a large organisation or a university or a TAFE, we could actually map the program. We could use the blueprint to identify things like who is getting career development learning, what learning are they getting, who is missing out on learning, what learning isn't included, what could I do differently. So it's a really useful tool for reviewing and refining existing programs. And it can be used to design learning plans and portfolios for learners. It can help us to identify resources. So if we know that this is what our learning program has in it, it can help us identify resources. It can help us expand our services by designing products and programs according to the competencies. We can identify the competencies in career information. Career information can specify the competencies to help the purchasers know. The blueprint can help us with staff development workshops. If we have, for example, others helping us facilitate the program, we can explain career development by using the blueprint. And it can also be useful to parents and other stakeholders to understand career development. So there are a lot of uses of the blueprint and a lot of potential users of the blueprint. So obviously career development practitioners who may work with associate career development practitioners, educators in primary schools, other lecturers or staff in TAFE or other universities. Community agencies could use the blueprint for perhaps people who are long-term unemployed or whatever. It can also help people who are not career development practitioners but provide related services. So government programs perhaps that provide employment services, disability services, rehabilitation counsellors, public and private sector organisations, and resource developers and publishers who may not necessarily be career development practitioners, but they're working in the space to assist people. So how do we do that assistance? How do we help people? Well, basically through experiential learning. So this is the application of the blueprint for career development. So experiential learning is about learning by doing. It's about learners taking an active role in their learning. And it means that if learners are taking an active role in their learning, we have to step back a bit from taking an expert role and a didactic role to taking a facilitative role. And we facilitate learning in experiential learning through 4 stages. Experience is an experience that's common to all learners. Now, that might be something that we know all learners have done in the past. So, for example, it could mean that we have a cohort of learners who've engaged in work integrated learning. It could mean that if we're working with, say, year 10s, we know that they've all transitioned into secondary school at some point. So that's an experience that we know they've all had. Or we might provide an experience like a guest speaker, a film, a work experience, a work observation that actually provides a learning experience. The next stage is reflecting, thinking about that experience and making sense of it, asking questions like what happened, what were the outcomes, and then moving to the next stage of thinking about what have I learned, what did I do to influence the outcomes, and then the doing part of it is how could I apply my learning? Based on my experience, what could I do now? And then learners can go away, try something, And then that could be the experience that begins a whole new phase of experiential learning. So that's the theory that's most recommended to facilitate career development learning, which is one of the elements of the blueprint. The final element of the blueprint is contextualizing the blueprint, because one size fits all may not be appropriate to everybody. And I've explained that a little bit earlier on, that we need to think about customizing the competencies, customizing the performance indicators for the particular group and the particular setting in which we work. So this is really important to do. In terms of the blueprint, you might think, well, that seems all very complex, but the blueprint actually contains a number of practice guides, 10 to be exact, that actually guide you through everything you would need to do with the blueprint: determining learners' needs, developing resources, evaluating the program, etc. So you'll find these practice guides and they'll be really, really useful to you. So that, in a nutshell, is the orientation to the blueprint. These are the references that we've used to produce this orientation session. And I'll hand over to David now, and I wish you well in your application of the blueprint.
Thank you very much, Mary. As Mary said, that was a very quick run through of the blueprint. Just before we get on to where you can go and get some more information, obviously this session and all of these sessions have been brought to us thanks to the National Careers Institute, so we would like to acknowledge their support of these orientation sessions and the masterclass sessions, which are coming up in March. If you're looking for more information on the blueprint, I'm sure most of you know where it exists now. You can actually visit the Your Career website. So if you go to the Your Career website, which is yourcareer.gov.au, if you click on the resources tab, you'll be able to download a copy of the blueprint, as well as that poster which Mary showed us at the beginning of the session. And obviously, we're very keen to hear what you thought about this morning's orientation session. So if you've got your phone handy or a tablet, you can obviously click on that QR code, which will take you to a quick 30-second, 1-minute survey just to give us some feedback. If not, we will actually be sending you an email following this session, which will have a link to the survey, as well as a link to the Your Career website, where you'll be able to access the blueprint and the poster and any further information that you may require. So thank you very much for your attendance today. We look forward to you starting to use the blueprint and implementing it in your setting. And we look forward to seeing some of you probably at a masterclass and any future sessions that may come up. So thanks very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.